Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more predator patterning. And today we've got another combination that I'm really excited to see what kind of a pattern it can give us, because I'm thinking we should see some really good looking results. We've seen plenty of good results with these shells, and we've seen some really good looking results with this choke as well that we recently have been testing. So putting the two of them together, I'm thinking should give us some pretty good looking patterns, but we'll see what we can get out of them. But as for the shells I've got out here today, I brought out some more of the Hornady Heavy Magnum Coyote loads. These ones are 12 gauge, 3-inch, 1.5 ounce payload of lead BB, and it says here on the side they're moving about 1,300 feet per second. And it also suggests either an improved cylinder or modified choke, but we have run these through pretty much the full gambit of your typical choke range, and they do seem to perform really well through that modified to full choke type of range. So I'm really excited to see what they can do through today's choke. And before I forget, these do have the Hornady Versatite wad in them, which is essentially just a federal flight control wad. So we will also kind of get a little glimpse as to how that might perform through this choke as well. So definitely a pretty interesting combination that we have set up out here today. But as for the setup we've got here today, I brought out the Remington 1187 here, but I threw in this choke, which is the Kicks Buck Kicker full choke. You can get an extra full and a light full in the Buck Kicker. This one is the full choke, which is right in the middle of their range. I did measure it out to be a 693 constriction, so it is right in that typical full choke type of constriction range. And even though this is a buckshot choke, I have a feeling that it's going to do pretty well with a little bit larger shot size kind of predator loads as well. So we'll see what it can do with these Hornady Heavy Magnum Coyotes today. But as for today's test, everything is the same as usual. I have the big sheet of paper set up down there at 40 yards. I have the chronograph as well so we can get our velocity. And I also have a few templates we can lay over our results to kind of get a better reference point as to how it would have patterned in some real life type of scenarios. But let's get you guys set up with a view of this target and take this shot and see just what kind of results we're able to get with these Hornady Magnum Coyotes through the Buck Kicker full choke today. Okay, so that round gave us 1328 through the chrono. The boss does claim 1300, so I'd say that we're pretty well right where we're supposed to be. And 1328 for a load of lead BB like that is going to be more than enough out to 40-50 yards all day long on a coyote or something. So I'd say we're looking perfectly fine as far as velocity goes up here, but how does our pattern actually look down there at 40 yards? Let's go check it out and see what we got. Alright, now we're down here at our 40-yard paper, and this is what we got. And I gotta say, it's rather interesting. Our core might be just a touch low on the paper overall here, but as for a pattern, it's a little bit all over the place. Typically, we see a pretty nice and circular, even-looking spread. This one, we kind of have a string straight across the middle that's kind of a hot zone for pellets all the way straight across, and on top of it, it's a bunch of lonely sporadic stuff, and down below it's a bunch of little strings. So definitely not a very even looking pattern overall here, and I'm kind of surprised, to be honest with you. Now, of course, with that being said, if you put that pattern on a coyote or a fox or a groundhog or whatever the case would be, yeah, he's still not making it through that's for sure. But compared to what we've seen both out of these shells and this choke in previous testing, I was expecting a lot better of a pattern. Maybe not necessarily a tighter pattern, but at least a more even pattern than this. So is it terrible? Definitely not. We've seen way worse, but it's definitely not the best combination we've seen from these shells, that's for sure. And for a size reference here, the paper itself is 36 inches wide by probably about 40 inches tall or so, and we have shot pretty much all the way across left to right, so it is somewhere in the ballpark of a 34 to 36 inch type of spread here, with a bunch of little stringy stuff all throughout it, along with that one little stripe across the middle that's a hotter part of the pattern. So definitely a little bit of a goofy looking pattern, but let's throw a couple templates up here just to get a reference point as to how it would have done if you would have taken this shot in a more real life type of scenario. Okay, so here's our 10-inch circle, and with the 10-inch circle, I do give it the benefit of the doubt and put it in the actual core of our pattern, and I think the core was just a touch low on this one. But as you can see, we have roughly about 20 or 21 pellets inside of that 10-inch circle, which with a load of lead BB at 40 yards, that's going to be plenty good enough on any kind of a predator or vermin that you would ever need to use it for. So if we were just looking at a 10-inch circle here, although it's definitely not the tightest or hottest 10 10-inch circle we've seen out of these particular shells. It's not terrible looking, but let's throw the hog template up here to kind of get a better reference point as to how it would have done in a hunting type of scenario on an animal roughly the size of a larger coyote or so. Okay, so here's that hog template, and right off the bat, I personally probably wouldn't use these shells for hunting hogs. You could probably do it within a reasonable distance anyway, but this template is pretty much just for a size reference more than anything, since I don't have a coyote template made up yet. Now, a coyote might be just a touch smaller than this hog, and a fox might be a little smaller than that. Either way, we can still kind of get a reference as to what we want to see here, and as you can see, you would be more than good enough as for a spread goes out to 40 yards and 50 yards as well, I'm sure, on any kind of predator, fox, coyote, whatever the case would be. But you can still definitely see that string right across the middle of the pattern right there, which is rather interesting and not something I would typically like to see. I would like to see a little bit more of a circular, more even spread. But even though this is not the greatest pattern we've seen from these shells, it is still more than good enough to do anything you would need it to do out to that 40 to 50 yard range on predators or vermins or anything like that. So I guess at the end of the day, it's definitely not a terrible result, just a little bit goofy of a pattern. Okay, and here's the wad out of that shell, and as you can see, it is pretty much just a flight control wad. It's got these flaps that kind of open up on the side, as well as the little tail fins down here. And this one looks pretty well perfect. Absolutely normal based on what we've seen out of these previously. There's nothing stuck down in there. All three of the little side pedals here opened up perfectly fine, or at least the same as they always really do for us. So I don't know, definitely the wad looks perfectly fine, but we did see a little goofy of a pattern. So I don't know on this one, but the wad, I think, pretty well did what it was supposed to do for us. Alright y'all, well, what did you think about that pattern right there? It's definitely not terrible necessarily, but it is a little bit on the goofy side compared to what we've seen out of these shells previously. You have a pretty hot stripe across the middle of the pattern with a bunch of little stringy stuff on the top and bottom. And like I've already said a few times here, I would rather see a little bit more of a broad but even and circular pattern than a stripy pattern like that. But I guess at the end of the day, it is still good enough for what you would be using it for, although it's definitely not the best pattern we've ever gotten out of them, that's for sure. But as always, leave your thoughts in the comments. Is that about what you expected to see, or were you a little surprised one way or the other? And have you tested any of these Hornady Heavy Magnum Coyote BB shells, or put them through that buck kicker full choke? And if so, what kind of results have you seen out of them? And would you hunt with a pattern like that, even though it isn't perfect, or at least it isn't as good as what we had seen previously through other combinations with it? Let me know all that down below. But at the end of the day here, if that's the combo you had to work with, you would still be just fine out to 50 yards or so with it. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description down below if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.